Day 42 of the Iran war, and Vice President VP Vance is flying into what intelligence sources are calling the most dangerous diplomatic mission since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Pakistan brokered a ceasefire that was supposed to hold, but Israeli strikes on Lebanon just shattered the fragile truce within hours of Vance's departure for Islamabad. The ceasefire isn't holding. Tehran is denying responsibility for new drone strikes on Kuwait, and China is watching every move to prepare for Taiwan. This war didn't start on February 27th when Israeli F-35s struck Iranian nuclear facilities near Natanz. It began 18 months earlier, when Iranian proxies in Iraq launched coordinated attacks on 3 American bases simultaneously, killing 47 U.S. servicemen. The Biden administration's response was measured, surgical strikes on weapons depots. But when Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders were caught on intercepted communications laughing about American weakness, something shifted in Washington's calculations. Intelligence agencies had been tracking Iranian uranium enrichment hitting 90% purity, weapons-grade material, at undisclosed sites beyond international monitoring. The assassination of a senior Mossad operative in Vienna by Iranian agents last December became the final trigger. What the public doesn't know is that Israel had already positioned submarine-launched cruise missiles in the Persian Gulf weeks before the first strikes. This wasn't a reactive war. It was a premeditated dismantling of Iran's nuclear program that spiraled into something far larger when Tehran retaliated by closing the Strait of Hormuz. Here's exactly what's happening on day 42. Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif announced the ceasefire at 0400 hours local time, but within 6 hours, Israeli aircraft were pounding Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon, claiming they were responding to rocket attacks that killed 3 civilians in Haifa. Iran immediately accused Israel of violating the agreement's spirit, though technically Lebanon isn't covered under the Pakistan-mediated truce. The ceasefire specifically addresses direct U.S.-Iran and Israel-Iran military engagement, but leaves proxies in a gray zone that both sides are now exploiting. Kuwait reported a drone strike on its Ahmadi oil refinery this morning, blaming Iranian-manufactured drones launched from Iraqi territory. Tehran's denial sounds hollow given the drone's specifications match Iranian Shahed 136 models, but Iraq's government insists the attack originated from uncontrolled tribal areas they don't govern. Meanwhile, Vance's Air Force 2 landed in Islamabad 3 hours ago, where he'll meet Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian in a heavily secured compound outside the city. Intelligence sources reveal Iran is demanding complete sanctions relief and guarantees that Israel won't strike Iranian territory for 5 years. Israel wants permanent Iranian withdrawal from Syria and dismantling of proxy networks across the region, demands Tehran calls impossible to fulfill without losing strategic deterrence. The key players reveal why this ceasefire was always doomed to fragility. Vance represents a Trump administration trying to deliver on campaign promises to end foreign wars, but facing enormous pressure from Republican hawks who believe Iran needs complete defeat, not negotiated settlement. Trump himself is caught between his isolationist base and establishment figures who see Iranian nuclear capabilities as existential threats requiring military solutions. Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei approved negotiations but cannot appear weak to hardliners who view compromise as betrayal of revolutionary principles. Pakistan's Sharif took enormous risks mediating because his country desperately needs reduced regional tensions to focus on economic collapse and internal security threats. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu sees this war as legacy-defining opportunity to permanently degrade Iranian capabilities, but knows Israeli society cannot sustain prolonged conflict without American support. China's Xi Jinping is watching every detail, because Iran's resistance patterns provide blueprints for asymmetric warfare against superior conventional forces. Russia's Putin benefits from continued Middle Eastern chaos, diverting Western attention from Ukraine, which explains why Moscow's support for Iran has been carefully calibrated to prolong conflict without triggering direct confrontation. For India, this conflict represents a strategic nightmare wrapped in economic opportunity. Iranian oil supplies 22% of India's energy needs through carefully constructed sanctions workaround mechanisms that could collapse if American pressure intensifies. The war has already spiked global oil prices from $68 per barrel to $94, adding $23 billion to India's annual import bill. But India's defense manufacturers are seeing unprecedented demand for ammunition and spare parts from Middle Eastern allies, terrified of regional escalation. The Chabahar port project, India's gateway to Afghanistan and Central Asia bypassing Pakistan, sits frozen as Iranian infrastructure becomes legitimate military targets. More critically, the war is forcing India to choose between American strategic partnership and Iranian energy security at precisely the moment when China is increasing pressure along the line of actual control. Intelligence assessments suggest Iran has approached India about purchasing advanced air defense systems, specifically the Akash surface-to-air missiles that proved effective against Pakistani aircraft. New Delhi faces impossible calculations. Supporting Iran risks American sanctions, but abandoning Tehran could push Iranian leadership toward deeper Chinese embrace. The war is also accelerating India's defense technology independence as Western suppliers prioritize Middle Eastern allies, forcing Indian manufacturers to rapidly develop indigenous alternatives. 3 scenarios dominate intelligence community assessments for the next 30 days. Best case, Vance's negotiations produce temporary extension of the ceasefire with specific proxy guidelines, buying time for broader diplomatic framework addressing nuclear issues, regional proxy networks, and sanctions relief schedules. This requires both Iranian and Israeli leaders accepting partial victories while postponing maximal objectives. Worst case, ceasefire collapses within 72 hours as Israeli strikes on Lebanon trigger Iranian retaliation against American bases in Iraq, forcing direct military escalation that could close Gulf shipping lanes and spike oil above $120 per barrel. Most likely scenario sees continued low-level proxy warfare under ceasefire cover, with both sides testing boundaries while avoiding direct confrontation, essentially freezing current positions without resolving underlying strategic competition. But here's the surprising prediction. Pakistan emerges as the real winner regardless of outcome. Islamabad is positioning itself as indispensable mediator between American and Iranian interests, potentially unlocking Chinese investment commitments and American military aid simultaneously. This war isn't really about Iranian nuclear weapons or Israeli security anymore. It's become a preview of great power competition in an era where middle powers like Iran can impose massive costs on superpowers through asymmetric strategies. China is studying every Iranian tactic for future use against American forces in the Pacific. Russia is learning how proxy networks can substitute for direct military engagement. The outcome in the Persian Gulf will determine whether smaller nations believe they can successfully resist American pressure through clever alliances and unconventional warfare. Vance's mission in Islamabad isn't just about stopping immediate fighting, it's about establishing whether American military superiority can still enforce political outcomes in regions where competitors offer alternative partnerships. The next 48 hours of negotiations will reveal more about the future of global power than most people realize. That's your briefing for today. Subscribe so tomorrow's analysis lands in your feed the moment it goes live. And drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Do you think Iran's ceasefire offer is genuine diplomatic opening or strategic pause before escalation?